Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hi, and welcome to An Unconventional Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Strickland, the founder and CEO of Dissertation Done. I have with me today Dr. Darin Detwiler. Dr. Detwiler is an assistant dean, a consultant, an author, a speaker. We're going to get into what all of that means as we speak today. Welcome, Dr. Detwiler. How are you today?
Great. Yourself?
I am doing fine, doing well. I'd like to let everyone know that today's episode is brought to you by Dissertation Done. And so if you are an adult doctoral student and you are beginning the dissertation process, about to start, or maybe feel kind of stuck somewhere in the middle, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. We'll see if you might be a good fit for our Fast Track Your Dissertation coaching program. We tend to get our students through the dissertation process in about 12 months, which is amazing for most students, and we would love to see if you might be a good fit. And if by any chance you have already graduated or you are otherwise either working in the expert space as a coach or consultant, a speaker, or you might like to be working in that space, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/book, because the best way to get your word out and to really solidify your expertise is by being a published author who literally wrote the book on what you like to help people with. So reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/book, and we'll talk about that. So again, Dr. Detwiler, we mentioned author is one of your many titles, along with consultant and speaker and assistant dean. How did you come by this menagerie of titles, and how do you strike a balance with them?
Well, that's two questions. One is, it's rare that I would wear all those hats at the same time. There's a good part of my day where my calendar dictates to me that I am an assistant dean. There's other times when my calendar dictates to me that I'm a professor. There's other times where, I schedule in those events, whether it's sitting on an advisory board or writing for a book or researching and collaborating. There's also times where I get calls out of the blue. The past year has shown that even without going and traveling anywhere, that there's still a need for the networking and the connecting and the educating and the work that goes into leading and inspiring and advocating for this mission that really drives my work. Perhaps the cement that holds everything together is that mission that I work with. That's been found throughout my various careers and even through my doctoral program.
And that's so important. I talk with our students all the time, and our authors that we work with as well, about knowing your reason why and having a very firm understanding of that reason why, and then being strategic about following it throughout. And I know that you mentioned these many hats that you wear are strategically aligned with that reason why. Why don't you share that reason with folks? And I know you had a story about something that happened in a classroom while you were a school teacher that precipitated some of these many hats that you're wearing now.
Sure. We at the time, as we're going on our journey, you don't necessarily know what an event that comes out of the blue, or a question or a comment. You don't know what that impact is going to be. And before I go back too far, I wasn't a classroom teacher. I had been a high school, middle school teacher for about 16 years near Seattle, Washington. And I had been teaching a rather large unit on reform in America, looking at food and other areas of consumer protection. And this, at this specific time, was I had done this several times, several years in a row, but this specific event, it was the 20th anniversary of the Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak, which happened in 1993. And I literally had guest speakers in my classroom talking to my 8th grade students in a history class. I had doctors, lawyers, journalists, and other experts, not only in this field, but who were involved in this event 20 years prior. And a journalist, I don't blame this guy. He made a comment that revealed my background in what had happened 20 years earlier. And my students, they all had laptops in this classroom, and they quickly, I could see them going like this, and I could see the looks on their faces. Yeah. And with cameras rolling by the local network news because of this 20th anniversary event in my classroom, a student raised her hand and she asked me, Mr. D, if you were this involved back then 20 years ago and since then, and this is still a big problem today, why are you here in this classroom? And, they saw me as that one identity. They saw me as their teacher.
Right.
They didn't see me as someone who had been involved in a situation, both as someone who was impacted by it and as someone who had been working to bring about change in policy and culture around this. This was a moment that really forced me to rethink, why was I holding on to this role? And is this the only role that I could be doing that would have me associated with my mission? And obviously, to get back to what had happened 20 years earlier, I was 24 years old in 1993. I had just gotten out of the Navy. I was a nuclear engineer on a submarine. I thought I was a pretty smart guy. And at 24 years of age, most of your audience will probably think, you start thinking of yourself as immortal and you can do anything and everything.
Yeah,
and
everybody at 24 knows everything, that's for sure.
Exactly. And there was this outbreak of E. coli, and I had never really heard of E. coli before. I'd never thought about foodborne illness before. Right. And I had a wife and a young son who was about 9 years old. And I had my son, Riley. You see a photo of him. He was 16 months old. And I, never thought that he would be the one to get sick from eating a hamburger at a fast food restaurant because he had never eaten one. Yeah. But I also learned about person-to-person contact and how E. coli, a foodborne pathogen, can spread from person to person. And in this case, it passed from another kid in his daycare to my son. This was a shock. You have denial. This isn't going to happen to you. Right. Everything will blow over, kind of a thing. But within the course of a month, my son goes from literally taking his first steps and speaking a very limited vocabulary at 16 months of age to being in a situation where I'm holding him on my lap on a hospital bed and he's saying baba, which was his word for bottle, because he didn't understand what an IV was. Right. I watched my son being put into a helicopter, being airlifted to Seattle's Children's Hospital. I get down there and I see him. I'm having a hard time seeing him in a hospital bed as his little boy body is dwarfed by wires and tubes and monitors and then I did eventually see him again outside of that hospital, but as he was being carried in the world's smallest white coffin. This puts you in terms of not only questioning the world and religion and your purpose and your definition and your title and the meaning of life, but you start to rethink things. And initially I wanted to be a voice and be involved in this idea of never having anyone go through what I went through. Too many families
did that come about? Because I got to imagine the first thing you're going to do is, just be angry. You're going to blame the kid's parents who brought him to the daycare. You're going to blame the kid who came to the daycare, the food place. I mean, there's got to be this whole rush of emotions that happens. How did you get through that to this notion of, okay, now I want to make sure I'm the one that prevents this from happening again?
There's an endless collection of emotions here.
Yeah.
You're dealing with shock, you're dealing with loss and grieving, you're dealing with anger, you're dealing with confusion, you're dealing with this idea of how do I put on one face in front of the cameras that were rolling at the time, talking to reporters, whether it be for the local papers or for the New York Times, or being on Good Morning America, or being live on town hall with President Bill Clinton. There's an element of you want to get this information out. You want to be seen as a credible voice in this. You want to come with some resolve, and you don't even know what that resolve is. And even if there is a resolve, we don't have a time machine to go back and undo what was already done. Right. But two things, going back to that classroom experience 2 decades later, time is interesting in that two things had really stuck with me. One is that I lost my son, but my son did not have to lose his father.
Right.
And what do I do as someone who can help prevent another family from living with a chair forever empty at the family table? Right. The second thing is that I had, this notion that, oh, well, this will be fixed. Science, industry, the government, somehow this will go away. And clearly, we have lived through now 28 years, this endless cycle of repetitive failures and loss, in this specific case due to foodborne illness, foodborne pathogens, outbreaks and recalls and illnesses and deaths. And I can't necessarily right now, at least, have this expectation that someone out there is going to fix everything.
Right.
Someone out there needs to be responsible for this. If anything, this is such a big issue. One of the things I learned along the way was, we all know about Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, from 1906. That year after it was published, there was a literary review in the London Daily Times. And this reviewer of the book as a novel said that the things described by Mr. Sinclair happened yesterday, are happening today, and will happen tomorrow and the next day until some Hercules comes to cleanse the filthy stable. We know there's not really any one Hercules, but if we were to interpret that into more modern language, this idea of this Herculean effort that is needed to prevent this, to prevent these failures, to prevent harm. And an enormous amount of work is this body of work and strength and courage at all points throughout the journey of food, from the seed or from the land to all the way to the plate. And whereas I had thought that I was, working with the USDA as an advisor, providing that kind of perspective as a consumer, that was important. Where in the classroom, I saw the need to bring this story, even without my personal side of it, to bring this story when talking about reform in America and how reform in America was not something that just took place a century ago, that there perhaps are still a place for it today. And we need to understand the why behind political and legal and policy change and culture change. But that's only part of the story. And when that student asked me that question, my response was, I quit. I'm going to redo things. And it was at that point that, I finished off my contract for that year. And people I work with thought I was crazy. You know, you hear things like, in this economy, why would you leave your job? You've been here so long. You're throwing everything away to move across the country. And, you know, I thought, look, if I didn't do that then, you know, that was my window. That was I'm in that spot. If I didn't do that, then when would I ever do that? Or would I ever do that?
Right.
Relocating to the East Coast was this idea to be more involved in policy and advocacy. And I started teaching at a university as an adjunct instructor, and immediately learned of this doctoral program where I'd be able to finish off my doctoral studies. So within, I believe, 6 months of relocating to the East Coast, I found myself as a part-time instructor teaching 3 courses per quarter, and as a doctoral student taking 3 courses or so per quarter, and literally reinventing my life.
Make sure you're careful when you walk into the classroom that you're sitting on the right side of the desk.
Yeah. But even with those 2 titles, as literally an instructor and a student at the same university, both of those titles were still driven by this mission,
right?
Which was to bring about some type of a better change when it comes to food safety. So that's not only what brought me to my doctoral program, but also what I still do in terms of the things I teach and all those other titles I do today.
So and that's, first of all, it's amazing the resiliency of the human spirit. I cannot imagine going through that type of loss. I mean, I literally, I can't. I lost folks when I was young that were close to me, but not that close. And having children myself, I just cannot imagine what that would be like. So to take that event and turn it into something positive for you, for your life's focus and your mission, and also for the rest of the world, is very commendable and amazing. So that's just number one. When you have this, obviously this mission that's driving you forward, how did that impact your doctoral degree program, the work, the project, all of it? How did that impact?
Well, first, I didn't think that I was ever going to be considered as someone who could be in a doctoral program. You know, being the first one in my family to go to university, I'm definitely the first person to apply for a doctoral program. And my wife, who I hadn't even, I was, by the time I relocated to the East Coast, I was a single man. My kids are adults. And I have a new woman in my life, a new person who really helped me through these changes and adjustments, and not only encouraged me, but kept reminding me about how I am so passionate about my mission. And I am so, you know, if I don't do this, then how can I expect others to do this? If this isn't enough of a mission for me to do this research that I wanted to do, then what is? And when I doubted myself, she encouraged me. And when I fell behind, when I was sluggish, she literally picked me up and pushed me and said, "You need to do this." You know, you go into this thinking, I want to do this. It's like a funnel. You go in thinking, I'm going to do this. And as you kind of go through the process, you keep narrowing and narrowing in terms of what exactly is going to be the focus. Doesn't mean that you lose track of your mission, but it just means in terms of what can my research, what can my work in this area really do? And it had to go beyond telling a story. It had to go beyond recounting the history of it. It had to look at the idea of some practical work. And at the time, the FDA was working on finalizing and working to implement their rules for the 2000, well, Obama signed it in 2011, January. of 2011, the FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act.
Okay.
And there were so many things to be determined and decided and defined. I said, look, this is what I teach and this is what I'm studying, and I need to be closer. And I was very fortunate in being able to get a part-time position as a policy coordinator for this nonprofit organization that literally was paying me and my expenses to travel around the country with the FDA, to go to all these hearings, to go to all these public meetings, to go all these listening sessions, and not only to represent them, but to be part of this process. And this became literally like an artist in the studio, you know, like a cook in the kitchen, whatever you want to use as an analogy. I could not be any closer to the source of the work that was going on for this. And there were other events I was involved in. There were other agencies I was working with, meeting with the CDC or the USDA. There was a landmark trial for the CEO and some executives from a food company that had a major outbreak, and I was in the courtroom for that. So finding myself at this level of proximity to what was going on was about as real world experiential, access to those people with the information as I could be. And many of these people knew who I was. At the same time I was representing them, I was speaking, whether it is at different places around the country or even beyond.
Right.
And, we had I was in a cohort for my doctoral program, and our cohort had, I believe it was like a 3-day weekend every month where everyone would come to Boston, and we'd have these sessions in addition to all the other work going on. And there were times I literally had to fly back home because I was living in the Boston area at this time. And so here I was like, oh, how convenient. I live in Boston. Right. My class, we meet in Boston. I literally had to fly home and schedule my calendar. I got to fly back from Spain to go to class, or I got to fly back from London to go to class, or fly back from Savannah, Georgia, or San Francisco to go to class. There were times I literally went from the airport with my luggage, to the university, to go into the classroom. And like you said, it's like, okay, I'm there to be a student right now. And there's other times I am there to be an instructor, the other side of the table, if you will, or of the podium. And so it became this opportunity to grow as a student, and how it impacted me not only as a student, but as an instructor in food policy in those areas, as someone who was writing articles and advising and sitting on advisory boards. But as you can imagine, it impacted me as a father, because here I was able to not only justify walking away from my career in education on the West Coast and relocating to the East Coast, but justifying this major change in my definition and in my work to deviate from what I was doing. But can I do this under this guise of still making an impact in an area that I was at the time and still hold as my mission? And, a lot of people were looking at, you look at what you're doing that week, that month, you look at that quarter, you look at the idea of completing a class, your grades for a class, you look at getting your degree. And here I am looking not only at, getting my degree, but what am I going to do with this?
Right.
And as a major transformative period of my life.
And you mentioned the access that you had and the traveling and being able to be there in the room when all of these decisions were being made or when these events were happening. How much of that access was because of your doctoral status, because you were only a student at that time? Would you have been able to do that as well?
None of it was because of my doctoral status.
Right.
It was purely because of my role as a senior policy coordinator for a nonprofit organization. It was purely because of my history, having worked directly with the USDA, having served on the National Advisory Committee, 2 appointments by the Secretary of Agriculture, my work with national organizations. I was well known as a participant, as a stakeholder, and as a voice in this arena, and that's what allowed me to gain access to these opportunities. It was just almost an anecdote that I was a doctoral candidate. What it did do, however, is it forced me to think of what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, what I'm engaged in these activities. I have to think of it like with different hats on the same time. How is this going to translate to what I write about? How is this going to translate to what I teach about? And again, I'm teaching like 3 courses per quarter, right? And how is this going to impact me as a student currently at one level of elevation in the classroom? And how is it going to impact me in terms of my doctoral research? I've got to go through the IRB. I've got to, treat this way. I've got to think about this. How does this align? What can I do with this? How am I networking? How am I building up resources for quantitative and qualitative data and later analysis? How am I documenting these resources? I'm literally having to learn how to document resources that it's like, you can't look it up because it was just said. It was just spoken at this event in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Going into this as someone who had been teaching for 16 years, I did have a bit of an advantage in terms of thinking like a student. It's not as if it had been 16 years since I'd been in a classroom. I had been in a classroom for the previous 16 years, just from a different side of the table, as you will.
Right. But the idea of having all that access and being so involved puts you in a similar position as many of our students who are mid-career, very successful, doing well, have a mission in life and in their career. What did you see a doctoral degree, that distinction, doing for you to further your career, so that was a motivation beyond the work that you were already doing, because you were already obviously contributing greatly to your primary mission in life? Where did you see the doctoral degree as fitting in and helping with that mission?
I believe, there's 2 sides to this. One is you start to feel a bit as if this could help me not feel like an outsider. I was literally referred to back in the 90s as the crying mom who wears pants, the dirty Harry, if you will, in the meat industry. This person who lost a son and now is telling us about this. This person who is advocating for this, who is trying to inspire, who is trying to educate, inform, and to support. But who is he, and what's his credibility? And you do start to develop this imposter syndrome, this idea of why am I here? And am I really here because of someone else's agenda? Or am I really here on my own agenda? And so the goal is, as going through this doctoral process, I want to add more to the resources that are out there. I want to make connections that have not been previously made. I want to have resources out there that I was able to contribute to. I want to, now, if you will, if I'm going to rethink myself and transform what I'm doing, I need to be able to talk about bigger, broader issues and bring some level of authority to that. I need to be able to, make larger connections and be able to cement myself as, and I think I've actually really enjoyed and been able to be successful in this area. I feel as if I'm at that very complicated Venn diagram of when I'm working with scientists, when I'm working with journalists, when I'm working with politicians, when I'm working with industry, when I'm working with nonprofit organizations, and I sit right at the middle in that I'm not here representing any one of them. I'm kind of representing all of them as someone from academia. And sometimes people go, well, are you representing Northeastern? Well, yes. I mean, I don't want to reflect poorly upon Northeastern, but Northeastern is not someone with a stake in this game.
Right.
That where I, my professional interests lie. And so it definitely plays an aspect of that. It definitely helps you build, and I'm not going to say that this is the same for everyone. Everyone transforms through a doctoral program in different ways.
True.
But I grew in terms of that cohort that I was in. That was a very interdisciplinary cohort. I mean, there was someone who was an expert in the bridges of New York. There was someone who was an expert in healthcare policy in Delaware. There was someone who was an expert in the black vote, changing the black vote. There was someone who was all these different areas of expertise.
Right.
And it was just amazing to work with them and to hear from them and to be thought of as someone who is, worthy of being in this pool of people. And it does, if all I spent my time and focus on was on my one area of interest or area of research, I would have missed out that opportunity to help build better connections in the bigger picture of what I was studying, and also to learn about these connections with different topics. So, I would say, I guess quickly in summary, that it helped my transformation in terms of my personal and emotional and confidence and my ability to fit into the different audiences that I've been able to see grow ever since then. It's resulted in a better understanding of law and policy and of research and things obviously pertaining to my research. But it's also definitely opened up some doors in terms of the work that I do in and out of the classroom for me.
Right. Yeah, I think that what you started off saying was the way that you were perceived by particularly people in industry as you were advocating was something you had an emotional reaction to. I don't want to be perceived that way. As by having a doctoral degree, you're now no longer kind of the victim, but you pull into that role of the expert, which is what your mission requires. And so I think that that's important. A lot of people do pursue their doctoral degree because of wanting to have a sense of credibility. You already have the ability to do what you're doing, but to bring in that additional credibility is helpful. And then of course, the transformation that comes in with the doctoral degree program only helps you be more effective in all those ways that you just mentioned.
Well, I would imagine that many people, who have earned a doctorate, who continue to work with industry, to work outside the classroom, you find yourself at industry events, even in virtual worlds, and you look at who are the panelists, you look at who's at the table, and not that there's any one way of defining someone, but it is strange sometimes where the reason why that person's an expert is because they work for a big company. Right. And they may not even have a graduate degree. They may not have as many years of experience as you have, but the name of the company on their business card, or that company is able to afford them being the sponsor of the conference and on the agenda, is really what drives their credibility for being at that table. And when you don't have that, it really does help in many cases when you're able to have a degree or the benefits of that degree in terms of not only the research and the body of work that I've written, the engagements for speaking and consulting that I've done, and the networking I've been able to do. You put this bigger body of work together, and I like to think that when I am on that panel, when I'm on that stage, I can look at that in terms of, this is all that you have to do to be next to this person that has a major brand name
right.
On their business card, and it can pay off. There's no guarantee, but that is sometimes what one has to do in order to compete with that. Right. But the benefits of having a diverse panel of experts, someone that represents academia, someone that represents the research, and in my case, not only that, but someone who represents consumers and the consumer perspective it's very hard to get sometimes. Most panels, again, they're made up of people representing the companies who sponsored the event, not necessarily people that represent a diverse series of perspectives for stakeholders on that panel.
Right, and the folks that are in the audience, hopefully they can appreciate the difference between I have the brand name on my business card versus I have years of experience. I have, immersed myself in this. I am dedicated to this. And certainly from a consumer standpoint, I'm the person who's speaking for you objectively because of my academic background, but still that's a voice that I'm trying to make sure is heard.
Well, I agree with you 100%, but I would also, I guess, add that, when I'm looking at that person who's got a major company's name on their business card kind of thing, I definitely, the vast majority of those experiences are with people who put consumers' interest as a top priority. They do the right thing. They are people with whom I actually do want to be associated. There are people who I have consulted with, who I have involved in writing projects, who I literally consider friends, not only on professional and social media, but you go to some of these conferences and I don't want to say it's like a high school reunion, but you get that opportunity to network and mingle, and when I get to spend some time with some people I truly admire and appreciate. It's an honor. It's not a competition to be at that table with them. It's an honor and a pleasure to be at that table with them, to be on that stage with them, and to be part of that discussion, and hoping that the bigger, broader audience is able to see not only a diversity in perspectives, but an alignment in terms of that mission alignment for that conversation.
So, addressing your mission of food safety directly now, what do you think is the biggest outstanding challenge? I'm sure there's been a lot of progress made. A lot of things have happened in the past 20 some years now since the E. coli outbreak that you mentioned earlier. What's the biggest outstanding challenge in your mind?
So I wrote a book called Food Safety Past, Present, and Predictions.
Okay.
And it is, I think, 3 or 4 books in one. It's not just a way for me to get my doctoral thesis into a book. It's not just a way for me to go beyond my doctoral thesis and tell the stories that don't necessarily have a place in a doctoral thesis. I was able to work with a publisher and get them to change their model, their template, and allow me to at times write in first-person narrative along with that third-person academic voice. But in doing so, I also brought in over 75 interviews with the people who were actually there, the people who were making the policy, the people who were pushing the policy through Congress, the people who were advocating for policy, the people who were monitoring outbreaks or investigating recalls, the people from industry who were reacting to and responding to issues. I wanted to get their voices into that. But as you can imagine, past, present, and predictions, the chronology of the book would allow you to have predictions at the end, and the publisher wanted me to focus on technology, a much greater depth than what I did. And I said, look, it really doesn't fit within the organization of this book. I want to write a second book called Building the Future of Food Safety Technology, where I look at how my experiences, and this was completely, I didn't write this in first person, the second book, but again, I brought in over 25 different experts from completely different areas of industry and areas of expertise. And we said, look, everyone's talking about technology. Everyone's talking about blockchain. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. Everyone's talking about the Internet of Things. Everyone's talking about how technology. But when I go to these, literally, the only people there are in the food and drink industry, and we're only there to talk about blockchain. We're only there to talk about technology.
Right.
You find that people's definition of this and their understanding of this was completely skewed. Here are the decision makers, the people who are going to make directional changes for industry. They're going to have significant purchasing power and be leaders in this movement. And they were talking as if, well, we're not going to make any changes right now. We're going to wait until we can just, buy blockchain and turn it on. And I said, at this one event in San Francisco, I'll never forget this. I was saying, for those who are saying along this line, and we're not going to do anything until we have this, you need to be thinking about your stakeholders, about your vendors, your suppliers, your distributors, your security of the gate, your front end workers. That everything from an understanding of your mission and your values within a company, the various hazards and control points within your specific industry and your facilities. You need to have lines of communication. You need to have data collection. You need to have data storage. You need to have data analysis in order to bring on technology that's going to work with this.
Right.
And you need to have ethics and corporate social responsibility. And you need to have those people in play that are going to understand and be at that level of performance, which align with what you're trying to do. And I had an audience member raise his hand, and he goes, I'm sorry, let me say this. I said, you can't turn on blockchain Monday night and expect to communicate any better or be more ethical Tuesday morning.
Correct.
And someone raised his hand and goes, you can't say that. You can't stand there and say that. And I kind of jokingly turned around. I said, yes, I can. It's right there in my PowerPoint. It's my third bullet. This whole idea of how people were perceiving, you're looking at technology to provide this Herculean change. That's not going to be an easy change to make. And, it's kind of like, I used another analogy. I said, look, if I'm walking down the sidewalk in Gotham City, and for whatever reason, Batman's bat utility belt falls from the sky and lands on the sidewalk in front of me, I grab it and I put it on. That does not make me Batman just because I have his tools.
Right.
That does not make me that person. And just because you have blockchain does not make you any more ethical, any more secure, any more confident in your data collection and analysis. And I think that conversation has resonated well, and it's continued to resonate for the last few years. And it's really kind of shifted to this idea that, we have to think about the true benefits, that it's not purely reactive. Yes, there are technologies that will make it easier to trace back when there's an outbreak or there's a recall. Where did this come from? But what if we were using that technology to be predictive, to find evidence or instances before food goes out into commerce? What if we can't find everything? We can't predict and proactively find everything. But if we never try, then we will never find anything. And once you start doing that, once you start finding things in advance before, thousands of products go out into the market or whatever, you're increasing your resources and your options to prevent that problem, to mitigate that problem. But you're also minimizing your liabilities. And when we start talking in these kind of words, and people don't necessarily listen to the tech people, the IT people, because they're going to talk tech. And
Right.
people don't necessarily listen to the big corporations because, well, they have their experience and we're not them.
Right.
But as this kind of independent person from academia coming in and having these neutral platforms for this conversation with them, and then supporting when the government says, we can't focus on the technology if we don't have digitization of our records. Right now, we are so the American food industry is so driven by paper, paper-based records.
Amazing.
And you can't have, technology that's interacting with all these paper-based platforms. And so you got to look at these baby steps. You got to look at these issues which people were just not talking about. And ironically, during this period of time, I was serving as a doctoral thesis chair for someone who was who was researching global data protection regulations out of Europe, and looking at data security in ways that were just fascinating. And we started to talk about how the journey of food was so similar to the journey of data. And not only did this really help us with her doctoral thesis and the work I was doing with her, but as soon as she defended her thesis and graduated, I said, you need to write a chapter in my book on building the future of food safety technology. And she goes, why? I don't know anything about food. And I said, no, but you know everything about the security of the data, and we won't have a future of food safety technology unless we have the security of that data. Yeah. So of all the things, being a doctoral thesis chair opened up new opportunities for me, not only to learn about this, different content area, but to network with someone who was an expert in global data protection in that industry, and now has a significant contribution in this area, looking at, again, the security of the data in terms of the future of food safety technology.
Well, that's just when you stay open to opportunities and learning opportunities, it's amazing what comes your way, and the connections that you can make when you're working in these communities. So I'll tell you, one of the things that's been inspiring to me listening to your story is that this mission is so much about helping people, about reaching across various aisles and bringing people together to work on a problem that is, close to you, something that you're passionate about, but that helps everybody. And that's something I found so rewarding about dealing with doctoral students and doctoral, people who have earned their doctoral degrees in general, is I'm sure that it's not an absolute rule. There are exceptions, I'm sure, but it has been a trend that I've noticed that so many people are doing things that really help the world. It's not just about helping themselves, it's about making this world a better place. And that's something I find inspiring, and I hope inspires our students who are still in this process of getting there themselves.
Well, I think, it's easy to talk like, mission and my background kind of stuff. Everyone has a different background. Everyone has a different story. And I think that regardless of your topic, regardless of your program or your college, every doctoral research project and thesis that is quote unquote worthy, if you will, has got to be something that has an incredible why behind it. What's the why behind this?
100% agree.
Right? It could be how am I impacted? It could be how you are impacted. It could be how others, it could be how a select group, a narrow group of people are impacted. It could be how everyone is impacted. It could be how people in a far off different place are impacted. But regardless of that, we can talk about quantitative and qualitative data analysis until you get a great grade in that course. Until you're blue in the face talking about all of your data analysis and your methodology and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have that strong foundation of why, of understanding your stakeholders and how people are going to benefit from this, and how people are going to, say that this is important to me because of this, it doesn't necessarily find itself well into a doctoral thesis. Yes, there's a place for it. But, we're not necessarily talking about this emotional, persuasive plea to the extent of what you might find in a magazine or something like that, in terms of that hook for the readers. But it can come out in terms of how you are framing the need for this, and how you are framing that word, and how you stay motivated. There's a lot of moving parts, and believe me, there's some long nights and some stressful moments and some frustrating activities that you go through. And not all of us have a person in their lives that can pull or push us through this, or a personal reason why. But we have to find that in terms of what's in it for us. How are we? If I, the actual doctoral candidate myself, am not invested into this, it's going to show. it's going to show in terms of the amount of work I put into it and the care I put into it and how I capture and describe this in my thesis and how I defend this thesis. So we have to stay focused on the why or the mission or both behind what we're doing. And, I've worked with 4 doctoral candidates now as a chair, and every single time, the very first thing I do, the very first weeks I spend with this person is getting to know them and their story behind this story. Right. So I understand where they're coming from, what they, what brings them to this point, and why this is important to them and what they want to do with this beyond. Because I think that it's one thing for me to edit them and to say, you need to do this, right. Here's the calendar, but it's also important for me to hold them to their emotional and their mission-driven why behind what they're doing, and to understand that so that I can better understand not only where they're coming from, but where they're going with this.
And I use that word specifically, why. Know what your why is with our students all the time. I ask them, you first need to know your why for your doctoral degree. Why are you getting your doctoral degree? And then you have to make sure that you are intentional and strategic about pursuing that the entire time through your doctoral degree program. And so how that's reflected in your dissertation. There's a lot of things we can do depending on what your strategic focus is, but in making sure that is impacted on in your life goals, I think that's always very, very important. So your doctoral dissertation can be very much aligned with your why, or it can be a tool to get you to your why. Either one of those is valid, but to be aware of that why and to be intentional about it is important, because as you mentioned, there's going to be some long, difficult times to go through in this dissertation process.
Oh yeah.
I tell students, you're going to look in the mirror late one night and ask the person on the other side of that mirror, why are you doing this to me? And if you don't have a good answer, then it becomes awfully easy to recede into the background or to walk away from a program that you actually are committed to. You just have to know why.
Well, and the number of people who can stand there at this moment where they have a diploma in their hand, but they have no path in front of them. They have no plans. They have no dreams and ambitions. They have no network in place. They have no momentum, if you will. That is something I hope we could always avoid.
Yes.
Because, just having this diploma doesn't do anything for me.
Right.
But it is really what I do with this diploma. And you know how it is, at least where I went to school, I defended my doctoral thesis, and there was a good amount of time. We had the convocation, the hooding, but in terms of the actual graduation, actual graduation ceremony was sometime down the road. And for me, it was close to a year between earning my diploma and being able to graduate as the ceremony at the university. And in that time, not only had I become a full-time professor, but about 9 months later, I went from being a full-time professor and lead faculty to being the assistant dean for this is all the same college where I was a student. Yeah. And so here I was, there's a point in my life where I'm standing on stage as an assistant dean, shaking everyone's hand and handing a diploma I think I was on the right side of or the left side of the stage, and my counterpart was on the other side of the stage. And you get through the undergrads, you get through the grads, and then you get to the doctoral students, and then comes my name, and it's like, okay, I'm literally, like you said, both sides of the table in the program,
right here.
Yeah, it's like, oh, thank you, I give it good job, but you don't necessarily know where your path is going to take you. I've been very fortunate to be able to be in academia and still write and speak and advise and consult and work with media on this. It does go hand in hand very well. There are times where I'm not feeling nearly as limited as I did when I was a public school teacher.
Right.
And there's times where I'm able to be inspired by my students. If I do still teach a class every now and then, and I do a lot of guest lectures, be inspired by my students and collaborate with students and grow with them, and continue to be that lifelong learner who wears these multiple titles. And when lifelong learning becomes difficult with one of my titles, then I swap it out for another one. I'm lifelong learning as an assistant dean, or as a professor, or as an author, or as a speaker. But that lifelong learning really goes along with my mission, but it also has served me well in terms of trying to achieve what I can for my mission.
And I don't think that you could say it any better. I think that lifelong learning is important, and that combining that with a sense of mission can get you quite far, as you have demonstrated for everyone.
And sometimes you ask yourself, but how far is far? How far is too far, or how far is not far enough?
Right.
But I've said this before, and when I've written and when I'm on a stage, there'll never be an end to foodborne pathogens. There will always be failures in food safety, but we can lead better, we can educate better, we can inspire better, and support each other. We can continue to nurture those Herculean efforts of heroes in this industry. We can continue to build trust in our systems and in our policies, and even in our brand names. We can help create a culture where food safety is not an afterthought, or even if food safety is something that just people normally talk about. And some might think that that's kind of a very niche thing, but how niche is it if literally everyone
comes in contact with it every day?
Food comes into contact with food and is vulnerable to a failure in food safety. So, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we're all dealing with failures in food safety, we're not going to rise to the ability to focus on those higher rungs.
I think that we're far enough through the pandemic now that I think we're safely to the other side of some of these concerns. But I was worried for a while about what happens if our food supply chain breaks down, and what happens, the other side of things, sanitation, if that breaks down, because those are the two things. You go ask anybody in the military, what do you need to do to hold a forward installation? And we have to have supplies, and we have to have latrines, and those are the first things we do.
I spent 6 years on a submarine, and submarines can stay out to sea for a lot longer. But when the food runs out, your mission stops. And the last year with the pandemic has definitely shown that not only the level of resiliency that we have, in terms of universities and changing our modalities to have classes that are online or that are hybrid online on ground, but even specifically in terms of food, we have changed how we buy, how we order, how we deliver, how we prepare, how we deal with food. And we need to look at that resiliency. There's no one silver bullet. Blockchain would have not helped us in terms of this pandemic.
Right.
So we have to look at our bigger pictures of resiliency as consumers, and even as students, and even through the doctoral research process. You have to be able to deal with the need for resiliency. I've worked with doctoral students who their entire, this one student in particular, her entire doctoral research hinged on Hillary Clinton winning the election 4 years ago. And, as you can imagine, when she didn't, she could have walked away from everything she did. But she didn't. She chose to reframe and restructure and continue with her bigger picture. And I know that many of us have other things that have put us in a position where we have to radically change or even determine if we're going to continue on with our thesis. And I know in talking with you that even you have had a reason why, out of the blue, you need to rethink what you're doing in terms of your doctoral research. I'm assuming you've talked about that with your audience.
So yeah, you're talking about, I was at the University of Chicago. I was a graduate student there. I was working with a just towering figure in the field. And he died in a plane crash. It was obviously very unexpected, and did make me, reevaluate some things. The university told me I could either start over or I could take a break, and I decided in my case to take a break. But because of the identity issues I had wrapped up in the doctoral process, I ended up going back, and I did kind of start over, but in a different field. Based on where life had taken me at that point. So this notion of being open to change is certainly something that we all deal with throughout our lives. And to figure out how to make the best of that is the key to the game, I think.
Well, I think that it's something that anyone going into this program has to take into consideration, that this ideal image of the journey ahead, and the idea of what you and I might have talked about here as exceptions to the norms.
Yeah.
Are they really exceptions to the norms, or is it more likely that everyone at some scale is going to have something that pushes the need for resilience in the process, whether it be a minor setback or a major setback? And when we start to talk about things like our well-being, our support mechanisms, the people we surround ourselves with, things of that nature, we have to assume that it's as if everyone is at risk. It doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, what your earlier degrees are in or whatever. Everyone going through a process like this is equally at risk of having that need for taking steps in terms of resiliency, whether it is to change their focus or to even step back, take some time away and come back at this. But perhaps that's still built on a foundation of the why behind what you're doing this for in the first place.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the need for resiliency is there at all levels, or a variety of levels for doctoral students. And having that why and knowing where you want to go and what you want to do, that should be your guiding star. It allows you, it should be the criterion by which you make each of your decisions. And I mean that globally. I mean, do I go into a doctoral program or not? How do I want to handle my dissertation? When my committee member's saying to do it this way, should I do it this way or should I do it another way? What is strategically aligned with my life goals, with my vision, with my big reason why? That needs to be your guiding focus throughout this process. Open to change, resilient to the fact that the life will throw you a curveball, but staying on mission to make sure that you get to where you want to be.
There's also good curveballs too. I don't want to sound as if it's all doom and gloom. I got married. Only a few months before I defended my thesis.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget when my cohort threw a surprise, what do you call that? Not a wedding party, but
an engagement party or something.
Yeah, like an engagement party.
Yes.
A great friend of mine had a baby shower. His wife had a baby while he was in the program. And there's those hilarious moments. One of the people in my cohort, she was from Florida flying into Boston, and everything was great during the summer and a little bit into the fall. But then all of a sudden, she was freezing. She was so cold, because it's Boston and she didn't anticipate how cold it was going to be. And she had to leave class to get someone to take her to go get her like a scarf and gloves and a blanket. Kind of a thing, and we're all just kind of like, oh, Florida, kind of a thing, and the friendships, the people I still talk with on a weekly basis, the people I've been able to hire as instructors, because I know them, I know their content area, I know their level of expertise, and the networking that you can build from this, this, aside from my diploma and aside from what I've been able to do as a result of this, the friendships and the experiences that I had during this program, it is part of a journey too. Yeah. We can't rest everything in terms of how successful an experience is based on crossing the finish line.
Right.
Perhaps the successes are built on those experiences and the joy that you can find along the way as well.
And that's absolutely true in life. I tell folks all the time that life is about the journey, not the destination. But I tell my doctoral students that the dissertation is about the destination, not the journey. For most of them, they do want to get to graduation, so it's important that you're focused on that. But yes, you're going to have experiences along the way. You're going to meet people. You're going to grow in ways that are required of the doctoral by the doctoral process. Students will ask me sometimes, I don't know why my committee won't let me graduate. And I tell them, you're not ready. There's some transforming that you're going to see in yourself that will happen, and you'll know when you're ready. You'll really know when you're ready. You're not just going to be complaining about the committee, but you'll know it'll be time. And
well, my last doctoral candidate, not my current one, but my last one who graduated, I did give her the vote of not ready, and we did have her go on thesis continuation for a bit. And at first she hemmed and hawed about it, but when she was ultimately done and truly ready to defend her thesis, afterwards she came back and she goes, I know it was hard for me to take at the beginning, but I truly was better prepared, and I'm much more proud of what I did now and appreciative of this journey, even if it took me extra time to complete. I would today not be as proud of what I did if I didn't give it some more time. And it may be hard to accept at first, but I've never heard students who, when they go through that extra bit of time and they actually do complete what needs to be completed, don't give you that kind of response that they're appreciative of that opportunity to take a little bit of time longer, because it's not a race. It might sound like a race, but it's not really a race. For me, I guess it was a race because I wanted to be done with my doctorate before my youngest son was done with his bachelor's degree. But that's a personal race.
Yeah,
I also
everybody has those kind of time constraints. Everybody has reasons why they want to get finished. But yes, it's a transformative growth experience, and we might be able to pace that, but ultimately you have to take it as it comes.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, Dr. Detwiler, I have had such a fun time with you. I know the book is Food Safety, Past, Present, and Predictions. Then we have the second book, Building the Future of Food Safety Technology. What's the best way for folks to reach out to you if they want to continue this conversation, maybe learn a little bit more in their journey as a lifelong learner?
Sure. I can be found on LinkedIn. I can be found on Twitter. I've got 2 Twitter handles up above my head. I have a webpage, herculeaneffort.net, where I regularly connect with people around the world who want some advice, people who want inspiration, or people who need a second opinion on things. And, I like to think of it this way too. I have grown from so many different connections, and I hope to be one of those people that someone says, I'm really glad I connected with him too. Whether it is, some stories or just some words of encouragement, I'm really happy to help. And for those students who, whether it's food related or whatever, that idea of trying to break out of thinking that you're alone in this journey, or that only you have experienced these struggles or whatever, you're never alone. But when you're done with this, do make sure to celebrate and even share with those people who did consult or were inspirations to you along the way, because it really does help me to know that I didn't hold your hand when you wrote your doctoral thesis, but hey, if you were inspired by something I said or did, or if you were helped by something I said or did, I'm really glad you were able to achieve your goal and stay on your mission. And
building those networks is important, and giving gratitude is important. So combine those two and let the folks that helped you know that they helped you. I know I finished my dissertation in part because of a little strategic piece of help from someone, and if I didn't get it, I don't know where I'd be right now. So he might have looked at it as just a small thing that he did that he could do, but it was really important to me. So that's something that everybody should be appreciative for, those that are able to help them, their networks of support, because we all need them.
Well, thank you very much for asking me some questions and letting me be part of this conversation today.
And thank you so much for being here. I'll just remind everyone else that this episode has been brought to you by Dissertation Done. If you are a doctoral student and you need some additions to your support network, you can reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. That's dissertationdone.com/done. And if you, by any chance, are aspiring to be an expert or already working the expert space as a coach, consultant, speaker, that sort of thing, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/book and see if you might be a good fit for our Expand Your Authority program, where we help people become published authors. Thank you again so much, Dr. Detwiler, for being here with me today. I had a good time.
Me too.
And for everyone else, have a great day and go out and live your unconventional life.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.